There's a moment that happens quietly. No breaking news alert. No dramatic announcement. Just a pause, a look around. And for the first time, a strange thought crosses the mind. Wait, why isn't anyone looking at us anymore? For decades, Americans grew up believing the world revolved around them, their culture, their money, their politics, their opinions. But lately, something has shifted. And when Americans finally realize the world doesn't need them anymore, the realization doesn't come with anger first. It comes with confusion. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. For a long time, being American meant automatic relevance. Walk into any room anywhere in the world, and people were expected to care about your accent, your opinions, your passport, your country. Hollywood told that story. History books reinforced it. News channels repeated it every night. America wasn't just part of the world, it was the world. Or at least that's how it felt. But step outside the bubble now, and something feels off. Conversations move on without waiting for American approval. Global trends form without American input. Decisions get made elsewhere. And suddenly, that old certainty starts cracking. It often starts when Americans travel. They expect curiosity, maybe admiration. Instead, they're met with polite indifference. No one asks where they're from. No one is impressed. In some places, people don't even switch to English anymore. That's usually the first shock. Not hostility, not rejection, just being unimportant. And for someone raised on the idea that America leads and others follow, that silence can be louder than criticism. The world has changed faster than the American self-image. While Americans were busy arguing with each other countries were building systems, alliances, and identities that didn't depend on Washington. Asia didn't wait. Africa didn't wait. Europe quietly recalibrated. Technology spread. Education spread. Influence spread. And the idea that America was the default center of everything slowly became outdated. Not wrong, just outdated. Like an old map that no longer matches the terrain. What really stings isn't losing power, it's losing attention. Americans are used to being watched, commented on, reacted to. But now global conversations happen without them even being mentioned. Economic partnerships form that don't include American companies. Cultural trends explode online without touching U.S. soil. Political decisions are made with a simple assumption. America might not show up. And that assumption is new and unsettling. There's also the realization that American opinions don't carry the same weight they used to. For years, Americans were told their values were universal, that the rest of the world secretly wanted to be like them. But now, when Americans speak confidently about how things should work, the response is often a polite smile, or silence, or a quick change of subject. Because the world has learned there are many ways to succeed, and many of them don't look American at all. This is where disbelief turns into discomfort. Americans start noticing how often their country is referenced not as a leader, but as an example. Sometimes a warning, sometimes a case study. Healthcare, education, social stability, work-life balance. Other countries aren't copying anymore, they're comparing. And comparison is rarely flattering. That's a hard pill to swallow for a nation raised on exceptionalism. Even culturally, the shift is undeniable. American movies no longer dominate like they once did. Music from other countries charts globally. Fashion trends come from everywhere. Social media influencers build massive audiences without ever stepping foot in the US. And suddenly, Americans realize something deeply unsettling. People can enjoy global culture without America being at the center of it. At first, many Americans react with denial. They assume it's temporary, a phase, a misunderstanding. Surely the world will come back around. It always has before. But this time feels different, because the world isn't rejecting America. It's just moving on. And that's harder to argue against. You can't fight indifference. You can't protest irrelevance. You can only notice it. Some Americans respond with anger. They blame outsiders, globalism, media, anyone but themselves. Others respond with nostalgia, longing for a time when being American automatically meant something abroad. But a growing number respond with something quieter, reflection. They start asking uncomfortable questions. What if America was never as indispensable as they were told? What if influence has an expiration date? What if the world learned to function just fine without waiting for American approval? And that's the moment everything changes. Because realizing the world doesn't need you anymore doesn't mean you're worthless. It means you're no longer the main character. And for a country built on the idea of being the hero of the global story, That realization cuts deep. The irony is that the world isn't celebrating America's decline. Most people simply don't think about it at all. They're busy building their own futures. And that's what makes this shift so profound. America didn't lose the world in a dramatic fall. It lost it in a quiet fade from the spotlight. So when Americans finally realize the world doesn't need them anymore, the hardest part isn't losing power. It's losing the illusion that they were indispensable. And once that illusion breaks, there's no going back, only forward, into a world where America is just one voice among many. And for the first time in a long time, it has to learn how to listen. And that's the real question now. Not whether America can regain influence, but whether it can accept a world where influence is shared. Because the world didn't stop turning. It just stopped waiting. And what makes this realization even more uncomfortable is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in through small moments. An international meeting where America isn't leading the conversation. A global crisis where solutions are proposed without looking to Washington first. A technology breakthrough happening somewhere else. A major trade deal signed while Americans argue about whether it even matters. Each moment on its own seems insignificant. Together, they form a pattern that's impossible to ignore. For many Americans, the shock comes when they realize how much of their identity was tied to being needed, being the problem solver, the protector, the trendsetter. When that role fades, it leaves a vacuum, and into that vacuum comes frustration. Because if the world doesn't need America anymore, then what exactly is America's role now? That question doesn't have an easy answer, and it's one the country isn't used to asking. The rest of the world, meanwhile, has adapted. Countries have learned how to cooperate without American involvement. Regional powers have grown confident making decisions independently. Global institutions no longer pause when the U.S. hesitates. And perhaps most unsettling of all, younger generations outside America don't grow up dreaming of moving there anymore. They dream of staying, of building something at home, of creating success on their own terms. That's when the realization turns inward. Americans begin to notice how often they talk about the past, about back when things were different, about former dominance, former respect, former influence. And whenever a country spends more time defending its legacy than building its future, something is clearly shifting. The world notices and quietly adjusts. Some Americans take this moment as an insult. Others take it as an attack. But the truth is simpler and harder to accept. The world didn't turn against America. It simply grew up. It diversified. It learned that reliance on one nation was risky. And once alternatives existed, dependence disappeared. Not out of spite, out of necessity. There's also a deeper discomfort that few openly admit. If America is no longer essential, then many of the stories Americans were raised on need revisiting. The idea that success only comes from one system, that leadership only looks one way, that influence is permanent. When those beliefs collapse, what remains is uncertainty. And uncertainty is something America has always struggled with. Yet buried inside this realization is an opportunity, a chance to redefine what relevance looks like, to contribute instead of dominate, to collaborate instead of command. But that requires humility. And humility is difficult for a nation taught to see itself as exceptional rather than equal. The rest of the world is watching closely, not with hostility, but with curiosity. Will America adapt, or will it cling to an identity that no longer fits the world it helped create? Because the future doesn't belong to the loudest voice anymore. It belongs to the most adaptable ones. So when Americans finally realize the world doesn't need them anymore, the real test begins, not of power, not of wealth, but of maturity. Can a country that once stood alone at the center learn how to stand alongside others without feeling diminished? Because the world isn't asking America to disappear, it's asking it to change. And whether America sees that as an insult or an invitation will define what comes next. And that's why this moment matters more than any headline. Because history isn't ending, it's shifting. And this time, America doesn't get to decide the direction on its own.